Do you want to race through maps like a god? Wiping out huge packs of monsters as if they didn't exist? Freezing tier 16 bosses so they can't hit you until they die? Or even make the Trial Master really grumpy by beating every one of his challenges without breaking a sweat? If so, then this build is for you. Carry on watching, Exile. Hello everyone, you're watching Altek2k. This is a quick guide for my Freezing Pulse Elementalist, and let's jump straight into it. Build relies on a couple of cluster jewels. On this cluster jewel we have Doriani's Lesson. This is essential, make sure you get this. We also have Prismatic Heart and Cold-Blooded Killer. These aren't optimal, what you really want is Blanketed Snow and Inspired Oppression. Unfortunately these were 19 exalts and there's no way I'm getting that much cash this league. For our medium cluster jewels, they're both the same. For our notables, which is Pressure Points and Quick Getaway. And then we have a jewel in each one which gives us increased life, any resistance holes we need, and anything else that's useful for this build such as Critical Strike. But mostly the life. In the other cluster jewel we have Cold to the Core and Blanketed Snow. Blanketed Snow is great, Cold to the Core is not optimal. Ideally we'd go for something like Vengeful Commander, which gives us increased buff effect of our auras. Now this medium cluster jewel is really important. It allows our chills to cause shock, which gives us increased damage through cold conduction. We also have Eye of the Storm for 40% increased critical strike chance. And then our last stone here is the Anima Stone, which gives us our 5th golem. So 4 golems, you start off with 1, we get 1 extra from Golem Commander, and then we get 2 extra from the tree here, which is our first 2 Ascendancies for Liege of the Primordial and Elementalist. So each one gives us 1 extra golem. Along with that, we get 50% increased effective buffs granted by your golems per summoned golem, 25% for each. The first node also gives us 25% increased damage per summoned golem, so that's 125% for the 5 golems. Liege Primordial also gives us a nice quality of life in the form of golems that die get resummoned every 4 seconds. So if one dies, it will auto respawn without me having to recast it, which means I don't need to keep as close an eye on them as I would otherwise. Now do note that if they die and you leave the map before they respawn, you will have to recast them. So between maps and after deaths, always check your golems to make sure they're all up. Now along with all that good stuff, Elementalist makes our golems completely immune to elemental damage, so they don't take any damage from it at all. They'll only take damage from physical chaos. Along with that, they grant to us 35% increased chance to avoid elemental ailments per summoned golem, which means we have way over 100% chance to avoid elemental ailments, which means we're effectively immune to them. For our 3rd Ascendancy, we go Bastion of Elements. This gives us Primal Aegis, which gives us a massive elemental shield. So as we hit with elemental, it comes off that shield before it hits us. It also means we can't take reflected elemental damage, which means we can run any reflect map, which is very nice for a league starter, which this was and probably shouldn't have been. Finally, we get Mastermind of Discord. Now, 3rd and 4th Ascendancy you can get the other way round if you wish. Mastermind of Discord is a massive amount of extra damage, but I prefer to go for the defensive route. I actually did go Mastermind of Discord and I regretted it. I should have gone for Bastion of Elements first. Along with that, whenever we inflict exposure, which is all the time, we get 1% of mana per second regenerated. Okay, so what about the tree? The pathing's a little all over the place. It's delightful. I've changed it recently to take a medium cluster jewel out of here and go into life, so we got this extra life here. And also these mana nodes, which I rolled off and then put back on, just to make sure the mana's stable. If you run out of mana on this build, bossing will feel awful. And then the rest of the tree is basically about scaling cold damage, getting life, mana, and critical strike. Critical strike's essential for this build, because if we crit against an enemy, they're frozen. The other key one here is intensity. This gives us 1 extra intensity charge, and we'll talk about that a little more once we get into the skill gems themselves. Now, the other great thing about this build, having 5 golems, is that you always have an entourage who love you. Or at least you hope they do. On now to the gear, which is a bit weird. We have a wand, and then we have a massive Lionized Remorse armor shield, which doesn't seem to fit, you would think. But this shield is ridiculous. For only 2 chaos, you get over 200 maximum life, which gives us a life pool of around 5,425. Which could be higher if we change our chest, which I would do next. Because we've only got 117% maximum life on here. I'd want that along with 8% increased maximum life and maximum mana. That would help the build an awful lot. So this shield as of now is required. I did do 2 1s at the start and it died an awful lot, but this shield really does help survivability, and it also allows you to do pretty much any trial of chaos. So for our helmet, this is also essential. It's one of the new ones given in this league, which gives you a strong buff and then a drawback. The drawback on this one is that minions have effectively 10% more resistances. The sort of great thing it gives us is 80 to 118 cold damage to our spells. Now this helmet gives us +1 socketed minion gems. What it does with that cold damage, because Freezing Pulse has a damage effectiveness of 200%, it doubles that. So effectively we're getting 160 to almost 240 cold damage to spells, which is rather nice. And then the last thing is the Pandemonious. This is a really expensive amulet worth 3 exalts. If you're thinking, whoa, I can't afford that, you can make your own pretty straightforward. I actually did it from running 1 tool encounter, which I'll play in the top left hand corner of the screen for you now. The top left hand corner of the screen for you, from your perspective, not from mine. Left and right's really confusing. Really shouldn't be. For an anointment, I've switched from the Golem regen, which we used to have, to get Sanctuary, which gives us extra chance to block attack and spell damage, along with 12% increased resistances while holding a shield. For the wand, we have spell damage, +1 to level of all cold spell skill gems, 62% increased critical strike chance for spells. They're the key rolls here. Now what it would be good to have is that cold damage affecting spells, but it doesn't, it's locals. And then I've changed the quality bonus from giving us physical damage, which does nothing, to give us 1% increased elemental damage per 2 quality. So that's 10% increased elemental damage. Let's talk about rings now. One of the rings must have Frostbite on hit. This debuffs the enemies, allowing us to do far more cold damage. Everything else on here, not very important. Do make sure that you have at least 1 ring that gives us Frostbite. The other ring is just life, resistances and attributes, along with global crit on this particular case. Crit's key to this build, again, for the survivability. And everything else on the build is just there for life, resistances and attributes. So you can see here, life, resistances, movement speed, dexterity. Life, resistances, strength and dexterity. And then life, resistances, and global critical strike chance, and elemental damages if I've dealt a critical strike recently, which is all the time. And flasks, which are all important and I always massively underestimate, we have Wise Oak. For this, your cold resistance must be the highest of the 3. I used to have these tri-capped across, but as I upgraded gear, I didn't keep up with it. But cold is the most important highest, and that's 142 in this case. That gives us penetration. We also take 10% reduced damage from fire being our lowest resist. If we had all of those the same value, then all of them would get the damage buff and all of them would get the reduced damage taken, which is a lot more defensive. So if you can do it, do it. I really can't, I'm just far too far away from it now. Second flask is a critical strike flask, or a diamond flask, which in this case takes off curses. A Quicksilver Adrenaline so we can move around the map quickly. And then an Aziri's Promise to give us 2% of Leech of Chaos damage, along with 14% of elemental damage as extra chaos damage. This is a massive buff to damage. If we look at the tooltip, it's currently giving us 137344. If we hit Aziri's Promise, we're up to 156573. That's a massive amount of damage off 1 flask. Don't underestimate it. Skill links. Our main 6 link is Freezing Pulse, linked to Spell Echo, Inspiration, Controlled Destruction, Pinpoint, and Hypothermia. Spell Echo allows us to fire much faster. It basically gives us extra cast speed and fires 2 at once instead of just 1, so we get twice as many hits for our mana. Inspiration Support builds up charges and gives us increased elemental damage and increased critical strike chance per inspiration charge. Controlled Destruction gives us a lot of extra spell damage. Pinpoint is really good, we'll talk about that in the mechanics section. And then Hypothermia gives us extra damage and increases the effect of our chill, so monsters move even slower than they would before. Well, that would be if they weren't always frozen, which they are. This one is probably the least important, can probably be switched out for something else if you can find something that gives you more than 39% more damage with hits and ailments. Oh, the jewel for the belts is just cold damage to spells, life, and chance to block. So what about our other links? We have our golem set up in our helmet, which is Chaos Golem, Ice Golem, and Stone Golem, linked to Feeding Frenzy, which makes them all aggressive. So they'll go out and run and kill things, so I have to get really close to them for them to attack. We have a Lightning Golem in our wand, and we have a Flame Golem in our boots, giving us our 5. Also in our wand we have Frostbomb and Bone Chill. Frostbomb gives us exposure on the enemies, which is then given an extra 25% effectiveness from our Ascendancies, making resistances a lot less of a problem when we're attacking. This is mainly for bossing. It doesn't really affect our clear. Our movement skill setup is Flame Dash linked to Arcane Surge. We also have Clarity in this third link, which is leveled to level 8. Now, Arcane Surge grants us 13% more spell damage and increased cast speed to all our spells, not just the movement skill. So keep moving, gives us Arcane Surge charges, which then powers everything else. And then in our gloves, we have a cast when damage taken setup, which is cast when damage taken, Steel Skin, increased duration support, and Blood Rage. Notice this is a really high leveled cast when damage taken setup at level 18 and level 19 for Steel Skin, giving us the biggest buff possible. And then Blood Rage just gives us Frenzy Charge generation. And in our boots, we have our auras and a portal gem along with that flame golem, which is Herald of Ice, which gives us clear explosions, which helps our clear, and then Hatred for a lot of extra damage. And then the portal scroll just prevents us having to use portal scrolls, so I can keep my map filter high without having to worry about them. Just back to the tree, there are 2 gems here that don't give us life, and these are First Snows. You can get these in Act 5 as a quest reward, but you can only get 1 per character, so if you have a friend who plays, and they don't need the jewel, why don't you ask them if they can get it for you? Or you can just buy it off the market. They are fairly cheap. Key stats on this is when we shatter an enemy, which is all the time, because of Herald of Ice, we get 25% increased damage, which is a total of 50% damage across both gems. You also get 2 additional projectiles per freezing pulse, which gives us this massive beam in front of us. Now that massive beam in front of us actually shrinks. So if we fire, you'll see it goes down to just 4 projectiles. What's causing that? That is being caused by Pinpoint. What Pinpoint does is allows us to build up intensity charges. For each intensity charge, we get 30% more projectile damage, at the expense of losing 1 projectile. So the 4 additional projectiles from First Snow are lost once we reach 4 intensity charges, and in return, we get 120% more projectile damage, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now these intensity charges will stay here for a long time, so if you're boss fighting, standing still, you're absolutely fine, you're doing maximum damage. Now as you start to move around, intensity will drop and you'll get more. And if you teleport, you lose all intensity charges instantly. Now this is really good for mapping, because if you're running around a chaos encounter and you jump, your intensity is dropped and you get the massive wide beam again, giving you maximum kill potential against big packs of mobs. And if you think about it, while you are clearing, you are jumping around an awful lot, or moving an awful lot, which means that you're always really at the wide beam. It's only for bosses where you want this to be as narrow as possible, and not to move as much as possible to keep that damage high. Now, as I mentioned, this was my League starter. It probably shouldn't have been. It's too expensive for a League starter. I wouldn't recommend it for that. Let's talk about some pros and cons. Pros for this build is it's extremely good at clearing. It's one of the finest characters I've had for clearing. It's also really, really good for the Trials of Ascendancy, able to do most of them completely without dying. Where it suffers a little bit is bossing damage. Its boss damage is great for tier 16 bosses, but once you get to the Conquerors and Cyrus, which have really high resistances, it can feel like a chore killing them. It's not as fast as I'd like. Map mods that I don't like to do, extra projectiles are really good for killing you. Extra critical strike is also really good for killing you, and what else is really good for killing you? Monsters' movement speed cannot below base speed. This prevents us from freezing them solid. They'll keep moving even though they're frozen and chilled, which is extremely dangerous as most of our defences come from the fact that we absolutely freeze everything. As for levelling, you can level with Freezing Pulse pretty much from the first time you get to the town. It really is good at the very beginning and scales all the way to the end game. Now it never feels really bad until you get to like Cyrus, which he really is a pain. I think it took me about 20 minutes to kill him almost. It was ridiculously long. Now that's probably mainly because I kept forgetting to Frost Bomb him, because Frost Bomb doesn't last long. Let's just cast it. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 3 seconds is all you get from Frost Bomb. And then it's out. So you must, every 3 seconds, remember to put this back on him. Now the other thing is, he teleports around a lot, so you can have it on him, and you can't recast this until after. So we're losing a lot of extra damage from that ridiculous amount of penetration we get from this. And that's part of the reason I picked up Pandemonium. One, because the blind is really nice, because blinding enemies means they don't hit us half as effectively. But also, that penetration really does help when we can't get Frostbomb on a big boss. We've also got some cold damage and some cold resistance on this as well. Now, this build is more expensive than my usual build. Is it worth it? It's great fun for clear. It can survive pretty much anything now, apart from Cyrus, which does kill him quite often. Not in the first phase, strangely. The first phase, no problem at all. You can get to the end of that one, deathless. It's when he gets to his spinny, lasery thing that really hurts. And again, I think that's more because he's teleporting around all the time, so getting a frost bomb on him is a pain in the ass. I hope you found this mini build guide useful. If you did, please smash that like button. And with that, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.